Hello, it is Friday, May 26, 2018, and this is Camellia City, and I just had to share a couple of stories with you this morning. I was thinking about this story. Actually, I mentioned it to Tracy Salter yesterday, and so I had to go back and find the original source. I've got a couple of stories for you, but this takes place around 1940s. Greenville, Alabama, the beautiful Camellia City. And I'm getting these stories from a memoir written by Clifton Meador. So many things happen in Greenville now and have happened in the past that people don't realize how kooky they are and how utterly entertaining. And so anyway, here we go. I was telling Tracy about the history of camellias coming to Greenville. Obviously, we're covered in beautiful camellia bushes. We're the Camellia City, and those had to be imported many years ago. Well, in the 40s, Mr. Meador writes, Daddy had an extensive collection of camellia bushes. As I've said, Greenville was known all around Alabama as the Camellia City. Most of the men in town grew camellias. Men. They even had a men's camellia club that put on the camellia competition every February. Daddy was active in the club. They learned to graft fine and expensive camellia species onto cheap shrub plants and do all sorts of other gardening tricks. I don't know of another town where most of the men grew flowers. I think it explains a certain tenderness I've always associated with Greenville. Men who grow flowers are unlikely to be mean-spirited, even if they embezzle a bank now and then. So that was the first clue that there was something going on with the camellias in crime. So, yeah, it was a status symbol in town to have camellia bushes. Like I said, they were quite expensive, and also you didn't just buy one and throw it in the ground. You grafted. You might get a camellia branch or a smaller bush, or you're sharing in the expenses of. And they were really showpieces. And I don't know how it originally started. I'm sure somebody brought in the first camellia, and then, everybody else wanted one. Here's the crime story. I have to jump ahead here. There was only one major crime. This is Greenville in 1940 or 42, I believe. An embezzlement of the First National Bank, which still stands today, by the way, but is not a bank anymore. It was an inside job. The cashier of the bank, Clyde Marrow, stole what was in those days a hefty sum of money. The bank examiners uncovered the crime in their audit. Mr. Clyde was our neighbor across the street, so we were especially startled over the news. Well, all of us except Daddy. Over the years, Daddy had noted that the banker's yard was gradually filling with beautiful camellias, award-winning camellias, in fact. Some of the blooms took top prize at the annual Men's Camellia Show in February. Daddy kept saying, I just don't understand how a man working on a salary from a bank can afford all those expensive camellia plants. When the examiners caught up with him, he had been embezzling for 10 years, totaling nearly $15,000. Daddy quickly calculated the value of the fancy camellia bushes and figured that's where almost all of the money had gone. So, and I don't know what happened to that guy, but yeah, was willing to embezzle money just to put camellia bushes in his yard. That's how important they were in this town. And I would love to know which yard that was and see if those camellias still stand today. We'll have to find that yard and see if we can find the embezzled camellias. The camellias that sent a man to jail. Okay, this is a really cute childhood story from him about boogers. Now, if you're thinking the boogers come from your nose. Those aren't the boogers I'm talking about. And if you're Southern, you know that. You probably know what I'm talking about. When I was 11 years old, I saw a booger. I remember it like it was yesterday. Boogers are dark, scary creatures that come out at night in the winter time. At least that's what Mamie, our cook, taught me. She believed in boogers and was terrified of them. They were somehow connected to voodoo, which was still practiced in Greenville's black community in those days. From the time I was a little boy, Mamie told me all about these awful creatures. She was encyclopedic on the subject. She didn't do this to frighten me. She did it because she wanted me to be aware. She believed and made a believer out of me, too. The year I saw one was 1942, a cold, windy December night. Even though it was Alabama, the winters could be brutal. It was often a damp chill that had a way of intensifying the reading on the thermometer, especially when the wind kicked up. On this particular night, Mom had told me I could go to the movies with my friends John and Charles, and walk home by myself if I got back before 9, and I said I would. Everything was going fine until they persuaded me to stay for a second showing of the movie. That was a big mistake on my part. Not only was that going to make me late getting home, it also meant watching for a second time that night the horrible but irresistible Frankenstein. That hideous giant monster with dangling bandages and a spike through his neck, escaping from Dr. Frankenstein's castle laboratory and wandering into the village. Mobs of angry citizens with flaming torches chasing him down. A dead man made of human parts and brought to life by electricity. Everything about that movie terrified me. Now I had to walk home on a dark, cold night. As we walked out of the picture show into the pitch dark and vacant Commerce Street, I realized it was nearly 10 p.m. I knew I was in deep trouble for being over an hour late and disobeying Mama. John, Charles, and I began the quiet walk toward home down Commerce, now deadly still except for the sound of cold wind blowing a cloud of leaves down the middle of the empty street. We were the only humans in sight. Frankenstein was behind every corner. My house was only 6 blocks from the Ritz Theater, but at that moment it seemed like a mile. First John got to his house, then Charles dropped off at his. Now I was all alone. A combination of fears whirled in my mind. The Frankenstein monster, the black moonless night, Mama's wrath at me being late, but most of all, the unspeakable terror of boogers. I began to run through the darkness, with 4 more blocks to home. Soon I was at top speed. I could hear Mama's voice playing over and over in my mind. Mamie's voice. Boogers live up in trees and up under houses. They like it dark. Only come out in winter when it's cold and ain't nobody outside. They love the wind. They're always after somebody, especially if you're alone. The wooden rickety railroad bridge loomed ahead. It had stuck in my mind since leaving the movie. I knew I had to cross it. There was no other path to take. Mamie's booger lessons played over and over. Only thing to keep 'em away is a whistle or to talk out loud. Boogers don't like talking. Panting for breath, I tried to whistle, no luck. So I hummed tunes as loud as I could, now running faster toward that wooden railroad bridge. In winter, at night, no moon, boogers come out of hiding, all over the place, up under the bridges where the wind is howling and moaning. I could see the shadowy frame supports of the wooden bridge and the faint streetlight on the other side of it. Worst place is under a railroad bridge. Boogers love to swarm, howl with the wind. More than a dozen boogers up under that bridge. Don't you never go up under there. The railroad tracks ran through the center of town in a deep ravine. The wooden bridge ran from one edge of the ravine over the tracks to the other side. If I could get across that bridge without being caught by the boogers, I'd be safe under the streetlights on the other side. Because boogers don't like light. I now ran at full speed across the dreaded bridge. The wooden planks rattled as I stomped across them. I could hear the wind howl and moan in high pitches beneath the bridge. It had a human, desperate quality, like dead people trying to talk. A strong wind blew in my face, slowing my run. Every hair on my head and neck stood on end. Goose flesh covered my body. My mouth felt dry. My terror was in full bloom now. I got to the other side of the bridge and stopped under the last street light. I stood there in its glow, bent over with my hands on my knees, gasping for air, but temporarily safe. I now had two choices. I could continue down the street, where there were 2 more blocks to my house, with 2 more street lights to protect me, or I could make a radical decision and take a shortcut home across the unlit schoolyard. The shortcut would save me several minutes, but meant crossing that sprawling stretch of darkness and the tall, gangly oak tree standing in the middle of it. I knew that huge oak tree would be filled with boogers, especially on a cold and windy, moonless late December night. Emboldened by my safe run across the bridge, I made a snap decision. I hopped down the hill into the jet-black schoolyard, running again at top speed. I felt like my legs were churning faster than they ever had in my whole life. Before I knew it, the dreaded oak tree was in front of me, its tangled branches reaching wildly overhead. That's when I heard it, the flapping sound of wings. I looked over my shoulder to see a huge black form swoop down towards me. Long red flames spewed from its mouth like a flying dragon, and a brilliant yellow light beamed from its eyes. Clearly, I was its prey. It hissed and spat fire in my direction, and its beating wings whipped the frigid night air around me into fierce wind. As to what happened next, I can't say. All consciousness ceased. My mind turned off. One moment I was passing under the massive oak tree. The next I was standing on the porch of my house. One minute I was nearly in the clutches of a flame-breathing, yellow-eyed booger. A split second later, I had somehow been transported several hundred yards to the safety of my own doorstep. Time simply jumped. I flung open the door and stumbled into the living room where Daddy, Mama, and Dan were gathered around the radio listening to one of the weekly shows. A gentle fire cracked in the fireplace. "Well," Mama began, looking up from her sewing with a very serious face, "you're certainly late, young man. Where have you been?" I was trying desperately to calm my breathing and gather my thoughts into some sort of plausible response. I decided maybe she wouldn't notice what a state I was in, so I did my best imitation of nonchalance. "Oh," I began faking it, "just walking home from the movie with John and Charles. We stayed a little while over." "Why are you breathing so hard?" she asked. "Oh, just decided to run part of the way." You just didn't tell parents about seeing boogers. That was all there was to it. I flopped on the floor and stared into the coal fire in the grate, finally catching my breath. Its warmth enveloped me. I settled into the safe and protective coziness of home and family with my dog in my lap. And suddenly, the whole booger episode seemed very far away. So there you are. We have Crime for Camellias. We have voodoo going on in Greenville in the 1940s. And we have a very mysterious sighting of some sort of Mothman/booger. I told you this town was crazy. I hope you have a great Friday and a great Memorial weekend, and I will see you soon. Bye. Love you. Mwah.